The house did not become quiet after the exorcism. It became worse. Not louder. Not violent. Just wrong. According to parish notes filed in late 1976, the priest who performed the blessing at 112 Ocean Avenue wrote only a single sentence in the margin of his report. The disturbance has receded, but the atmosphere remains resistant. He never returned to the property. Witnesses later reported that the day after the ritual, the house stood in complete silence. No flies gathered on the windows. No sudden cold drafts pressed against the stairwell. The air inside felt still, unnaturally still, like a room sealed off from time. And that silence was the first sign that something had changed. 112 Ocean Avenue had already earned its reputation long before the church became involved. Police reports documented the violent crime that occurred inside its walls. Neighbors spoke of flashing lights, stretchers, and the heavy metallic smell that lingered for days after authorities sealed the doors. But what happened after the exorcism is rarely discussed. Because once the ritual ended, once the prayers were spoken and the holy water dried into pale stains along the baseboards, the house did not return to normal life. It entered a different kind of existence. According to church records, the ritual itself was brief. The attending priest stated that he felt an oppressive presence in the upstairs hallway but did not witness physical manifestations. He described sudden nausea, a pressure in his chest, and difficulty finishing certain passages of prayer. He insisted the rite was completed properly, but he also requested that the file remain internal. Within weeks, the original family vacated the home. Officially, it was due to stress and unwanted media attention. Unofficially, neighbors claimed they saw lights turning on in empty rooms after the family had already left. The house sat vacant through winter. Real estate agents who entered to evaluate the property described a strange sensation near the staircase landing. One agent later testified that she heard what sounded like slow breathing coming from the walls. She resigned from the sale shortly after. There were no visible signs of damage, no vandalism, no structural issues. Yet potential buyers consistently withdrew their interest after a single visit. A local contractor hired to repaint the interior lasted 2 days. On the second day, he left his equipment inside and never returned. When asked why, he simply said the upstairs bathroom door would not stay closed. He claimed it swung open on its own every time he turned his back. No drafts were detected. The hinges were replaced twice. It continued. In early spring, a new family moved in. They had been told about the history, but dismissed it as exaggerated folklore. They were practical people. The father worked in finance. The mother volunteered at a local school. They had 2 children under the age of 10. For the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. The house felt ordinary. Until it didn't. The mother later reported that she began waking up at exactly 3:14 a.m. each night. Not approximately. Not around that time. Exactly 3:14. She would wake with a sense of pressure on her chest. Not pain, just weight. The hallway outside the bedroom would appear darker than the rest of the house, as if the light from the street lamp refused to reach it. Her husband dismissed it as anxiety. Then their youngest child began talking to someone in the corner of his room. At first, it seemed like imagination. He described the tall man by the door. When asked to elaborate, he said the man did not blink. He said the man did not breathe. The parents installed a nightlight. The child refused to sleep with the door closed. 3 nights later, the father heard footsteps pacing above him long after both children were asleep. He checked every room. Nothing. The next morning, the basement door was open. The family insisted they had locked it the previous evening. There were no signs of forced entry. No footprints. No broken windows. Just the door standing open, revealing a darkness that seemed thicker than it should have been. The mother contacted the local parish quietly. She did not request another exorcism. She asked for a blessing. The priest who responded was not the same one who had performed the original rite. According to his written statement, he sensed no overt hostility in the home. However, he described a residual heaviness, concentrated in the northeast corner of the upstairs bedroom. He performed a brief prayer and sprinkled holy water along the hallway. As he descended the stairs, he paused. He later stated that he felt as though someone was standing directly behind him. When he turned, the staircase was empty. He did not mention this to the family. Within days, the disturbances intensified. Cabinet doors opened overnight. Family photographs fell from walls without explanation. The father's office computer turned on repeatedly at 3:14 a.m., displaying a blank white screen. No message, just white. The children began refusing to enter the upstairs bathroom. The older child reported hearing whispering when the shower was running. Investigators who later reviewed the case found no mechanical issues with the plumbing. The whispers were described as layered voices, speaking too quietly to understand, yet loud enough to recognize as speech. The family lasted 6 months. When they left, they did so abruptly. Neighbors watched as moving trucks arrived without notice. The mother appeared pale. The father refused to answer questions. They never publicly explained their departure. After that, the house remained empty for nearly a year. During that time, local teenagers occasionally approached the property at night. Stories had spread. Some claimed to see lights flickering behind the upper windows. One group reportedly entered through a rear door left unsecured. Only 2 of the 4 teenagers spoke about what they experienced. They described an overwhelming smell, like damp earth and something metallic. They claimed that once inside, their flashlights dimmed simultaneously. One of them began to feel dizzy near the staircase. Another heard what sounded like a low humming vibration in the walls. They left within minutes. One of the teenagers refused to speak about the incident again. Property records show that in late 1978, a new owner purchased the house at a significantly reduced price. He was a retired engineer with no children, no religious affiliation, and a reputation for skepticism. He told reporters that houses do not hold memories. He believed all previous claims were psychological projections amplified by media attention. He moved in alone. For the first month, he reported nothing unusual. He told a neighbor that the house felt surprisingly peaceful. Then winter returned. According to a letter he wrote to a friend, he began noticing small inconsistencies. Doors that felt heavier to close. Cold spots that lingered in specific corners. He installed temperature monitors throughout the house to disprove his own suspicions. The readings showed subtle but persistent drops in the upstairs hallway each night between 3:10 and 3:20 a.m. Not drastic, just enough to register. He adjusted the heating system. The pattern continued. He then placed a small tape recorder at the top of the stairs one evening before bed. The following morning, he reviewed the audio. For nearly 6 hours, there was silence. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., a faint sound emerged. It was not a voice. It was not movement. It was the distinct creak of a single step bearing weight. One step, followed by 3 seconds of silence. Then another. Slow. Measured. Ascending. The engineer stated in his notes that he had not left his bedroom that night. He slept with the door closed. The recorder was positioned where any human movement would have been clearly captured. Yet the steps did not continue past the final stair. They stopped just before reaching the landing, as if whoever or whatever was climbing had decided not to proceed further. He did not contact the church. Instead, he installed motion sensors. The sensors triggered repeatedly between 3:12 and 3:16 a.m. No visible cause was ever identified. Then something changed. The engineer began waking before 3:14. He described the sensation as anticipation, a tightening in his stomach minutes before the hour approached. One night, he forced himself to remain awake. He sat upright in bed, watching the digital clock on his nightstand. 3:13. The house was silent. 3:14. The hallway light outside his door flicked on. He had not installed any automatic lighting. He remained still. A soft pressure touched the outside of his bedroom door. Not a knock. Not a scrape. Just pressure. Like a hand resting flat against the wood. The door handle did not turn. The light remained on for exactly 40 seconds. Then it shut off. The pressure lifted. He waited another hour before moving. When he finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But the temperature had dropped sharply. And on the wood of his door, Faintly visible in the beam of his flashlight were 5 elongated marks. Not scratches. Not dents. More like impressions. As if something had pressed hard enough to leave memory in the grain. He moved out 2 weeks later. The house was listed again, by then, the exorcism had become part of its public identity. Real estate descriptions avoided direct references, but local rumor ensured no one was unaware. According to diocesan correspondence from 1980, church officials debated whether a second formal rite was necessary. The previous exorcism had addressed what they believed to be a presence attached to individuals, not the structure itself. This distinction became critical, because what remained in the house did not behave like a violent infestation. It behaved like something that had been disturbed and left behind. Clergy members who reviewed the case suggested that, in rare instances, intense emotional trauma can imprint onto a location. Not in a theatrical sense, but in a subtle, repetitive pattern. A residual haunting. But the events at 112 Ocean Avenue did not remain residual. They evolved. In 1981, a young couple purchased the home. They were aware of the history. They claimed not to be afraid of it. Within 3 months, the wife began documenting nightly disturbances in a journal. She recorded temperature fluctuations, unexplained sounds, recurring dreams of a tall figure standing in the hallway. She wrote that in her dreams, the figure never entered the bedroom. It simply waited. On the final page of her journal, there is a single sentence underlined twice. It feels like the house is watching to see who will break first. The journal ends there. Public records show the couple divorced the following year. The house remained. Still standing. Still silent in daylight. Still resisting peace. And decades later, investigators would return, not to perform another exorcism, but to answer a question no one had dared to ask before. What if the ritual worked? And this is what remains when something is forced out, but refuses to go die in 1994, nearly 2 decades after the first documented exorcism, a small private investigative group received permission to conduct a structured overnight study inside 112 Ocean Avenue. They were not thrill seekers. They were not clergy. They were researchers, 2 psychologists, a former police officer, and a sound engineer. Their goal was not to prove the supernatural. It was to examine long-term environmental impact after a religious intervention. According to their official report, the house appeared structurally stable. Wiring was intact. Foundation secure. No abnormal mold or carbon monoxide levels were detected. Air quality readings were within normal range. But the upstairs hallway registered a consistent temperature drop of 4 degrees between 3:10 and 3:18 a.m. The drop occurred regardless of heating adjustments. They set up 3 static cameras facing the staircase, the upstairs landing, and the northeast bedroom where prior priests had concentrated their blessings. At 3:12 a.m., the sound engineer noted a low-frequency hum barely audible without amplification. It resembled distant electrical interference, yet no source was identified. At 3:14 a.m., all 3 cameras experienced brief static distortion, lasting less than 2 seconds. When the footage stabilized, nothing visible had changed. But the sound engineer's recording captured something else. Not footsteps. Not whispering. A single exhale. Long. Measured. Close to the microphone placed at the top of the stairs. The police officer present insisted no one had moved. All participants were seated in the downstairs living room at the time. The recording was analyzed later. No mechanical source could be matched to the sound. The psychologists involved in the case later wrote privately that the house did not feel aggressive. It felt observant. They described a sensation of being evaluated. One of them reported a vivid waking image at 3:13 a.m., a mental picture of a door closing slowly, though no door physically moved. The study concluded with no definitive paranormal claim. Officially, they cited environmental anomalies combined with suggestibility influenced by the property's history. But the team never conducted a follow-up session. The house changed owners again in the early 2000s. This time, the new residents did something different. They refused to discuss the history. Neighbors later stated that the family requested no mention of past events. They repainted the exterior, replaced windows, renovated the kitchen. For nearly a year, no incidents were publicly reported. Then slowly small details emerged. A delivery driver claimed the front door opened before he knocked. A babysitter refused to return after hearing slow pacing upstairs while the children were asleep downstairs. The mother of the household reportedly began keeping every interior door open at night. When asked why, she said closed doors made her anxious. In 2004, local clergy were contacted again, not for a full exorcism but for consultation. The attending priest, whose written statement was later reviewed by diocesan archivists, noted something unusual. He wrote that the house did not present signs of active infestation. Instead, he described what he called spiritual scar tissue. He explained that, in rare cases, intense rituals performed under extreme emotional conditions can leave behind a form of echo. Not a spirit, not a demon, but an imprint of confrontation. According to his account, he sensed no external presence. However, he felt as though something had once occupied the space and been removed abruptly. He wrote, "The structure remembers the struggle." He declined to perform another exorcism. He recommended quiet prayer and time. The family remained for 3 more years before relocating. No dramatic public statement was made. The house was sold again. By this point, 112 Ocean Avenue had developed a peculiar pattern. No reports of violent attacks. No levitation. No physical harm. Only recurring anticipation at 3:14 a.m. Only the sensation of being watched from the hallway. Only the staircase that creaked beneath invisible weight. In 2010, a documentary crew requested permission to film inside the property overnight. The owners declined, but one member of the crew managed to conduct a brief interview outside with a former resident who agreed to speak anonymously. The former resident described the house in a single sentence. "It feels like something finished, but didn't leave." That statement caught the attention of theologians studying cases of successful exorcism. According to internal church documents, when an exorcism is deemed successful, the entity is believed to depart entirely. The location itself should return to neutrality. But in a small number of archived cases dating back to the 19th century, priests recorded residual disturbances in properties even after individuals were freed from possession. In those rare accounts, the disturbances were subtle. Clocks stopping at specific times, recurring cold drafts, persistent sensations of presence without manifestation. Some clergy theorized that the ritual of expulsion may disrupt more than a single entity. It may fracture an environment charged by trauma. In the case of 112 Ocean Avenue, the violent crime that predated the exorcism created a foundation of intense emotional energy. The subsequent ritual may have addressed one layer of disturbance while leaving another intact. By 2016, the house had undergone further renovation. New flooring, updated lighting, modern insulation. Visitors described it as beautiful, bright, deceptively normal. And yet, multiple independent guests reported the same experience when staying overnight in the upstairs bedroom. They woke moments before 3:14 a.m., not because of noise, not because of movement, but because of certainty. A certainty that someone was standing just beyond the door. One guest described the sensation as being measured. Another said the hallway felt deeper at night, as though it stretched farther than it did during the day. No photographic evidence has ever confirmed visual anomalies. No official report has declared the house unsafe. But one final account, documented quietly in 2019, remains the most unsettling. The current homeowner, a man in his late 40s with no previous interest in the house's history, began experiencing persistent insomnia. He denied belief in hauntings. He worked long hours and attributed his sleeplessness to stress. But his wife later revealed that he began waking nightly at 3:13 a.m. without explanation. On one particular night, he decided to confront the pattern directly. He left the bedroom door open. He stood in the hallway. He waited. At 3:14 a.m., the temperature shifted, not dramatically, but enough to feel against his skin. The staircase below him creaked.
Once. Twice. Slow.
Measured. Ascending. He remained frozen. The creaking stopped 3 steps below the landing. Silence filled the space between floors. Then, according to his statement, he felt something he struggled to describe. Not breath. Not touch. Recognition. As if whatever had once moved violently through the house now paused, aware that it was being acknowledged. He did not see a figure. He did not hear a voice. But he said the silence carried weight. After approximately 40 seconds, the temperature returned to normal. The house settled. The moment passed. He returned to bed. The following morning, he searched the staircase carefully. No physical marks. No damage. But when he placed his hand on the banister near the 3rd step from the top, he felt something odd. The wood was slightly indented. 5 faint impressions in the grain. Elongated. Almost identical to marks documented decades earlier on a bedroom door. He did not contact the church. He did not call investigators. He chose instead to remain. Because nothing in the house had ever crossed a fine line. Nothing attacked. Nothing revealed itself fully. It simply remained. And perhaps that is the true aftermath of a successful exorcism. Not flames. Not chaos. Not absolute peace. But absence with memory. A space where something once stood and resisted. A structure that endured confrontation. A silence that listens. Today, 112 Ocean Avenue stands as an ordinary home. Tourists drive past slowly. Neighbors walk their dogs without incident. Children ride bicycles along the street. In daylight, the house appears harmless. But those who have slept inside long enough describe the same pattern. The certainty at 3:13. The shift at 3:14. The staircase bearing unseen weight. And the feeling that the house itself is waiting. Not for violence. Not for possession. But for someone to stay long enough to understand what was truly forced out. And whether it ever really left.